everybody. This is Mark. Just recently celebrated a birthday, February the 12th, 1966. And I want to talk to you today about my recent discovery of my connection with what I have become known as Route 66. Route 66 is the main street of America, Old Trails Highway, America's Mother Road. There's any number of different words that were used, but the final designation was Route 66, and it was the first precursor to our modern day interstates. It ran from basically Chicago to LA, ended near the Santa Monica Pier. It started in like 1926 and was finally decommissioned in 1986. I'm gonna flash back to my boyhood days a little bit here, and then we'll come back around on our journey to Route 66. I was born and raised in Huntsville, Alabama, with two amazing parents. My parents did everything they could possibly do, and I was the first child, so it was all new to them on being parents. So it was a learning process for them, and some of the trouble I caused, I gave them a lot of opportunities for learning experiences. And sometimes those learning experiences on my behalf were good old-fashioned taken behind the woodshed, as we said in Alabama, for a little treatment. That was a belt, or it could have been a paint paddle, any number of different things. But I had two amazing parents that I grew to love very deeply, especially in my later years and their later years. My dad passed away roughly 5 years ago, and my mother about 3 years ago to advanced stages of Alzheimer's and dementia. And that was a gut-wrenching scenario for myself and my brother to go through, trying to deal with and help them the best that we could possibly help. But flashing back to those early days of my boyhood, I remember the excitement that I felt whenever I was told that we were going on vacation. And with all of my family being from East Tennessee, the hills of East Tennessee, outside of Knoxville, a lot of times that vacation included such things as visits up there to see my grandparents and my cousins and uncles and aunts and things like this. It also included some trips to Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, and the Smoky Mountains, which is a very beautiful area. I love the Smoky Mountains. There's such things as going up to the Smokies and blowing our horn as we went through the tunnels up there and getting the chain of horns blowing. That was always real cool. And I love just getting out and seeing new things. And those new things is 3 years into my birth, my younger brother was born. I'm only have one other brother, and he's 3 years younger than I am. And when he came along and we grew up some and got to be a little bit larger boys, I remember us going places together. And those places I flash back on and look at the fun times that me as a little boy had sitting in the back seat or sitting in the floorboard of the back seat of, I remember three specific cars very, very well. It was like a 1968 Buick Electra 225, a 1972 or 73 Pontiac Granville, white with red Landau top, and then a 1976 Olds 98. Now I remember that car very well because I actually drove that car myself. It had a 455 4-barrel in it, and for those of you that don't know, that was a huge motor back in those days. And we called them tanks or boats because they were about 24 foot long, and you could put today's smart car in the trunk of most of those cars back in those days. They just floated along. You felt like you was riding on a couch as you were riding in the those cars along the roads back in the day. And I was discussing this with a friend of mine a while back that got in trouble. I remember specifically on a couple of trips, the old cars like that had cigarette lighters that you pushed down and held, and then they'd pop back up when they got hot. Usually those are either in the doors or the back seat. And I remember on a trip going out west, as a matter of fact, I got my butt torn up for pushing and holding the cigarette lighter on the back of the seat in the old Pontiac. and almost setting the seat on fire. Those days are definitely different. I remember the days of going on a trip and having a mason jar in the back, and those older people will remember what that mason jar was used for. That was to keep you having to stop every few miles to go to the bathroom. And this is something that will be unheard of in today's world, of standing up beside your dad in the front seat as you're going down the road with his arm wrapped around you, looking at everything. That just is something that you wouldn't even think about. Or didn't have seatbelt buzzers or reminders, because those early cars didn't even have seatbelts in them at all, and the ones that did back in those days, they were typically above the door in some little wire springy holders up there that you would pull down. You'd have a single lap belt across you and things like this. The days of the safety and the difference in the cars then versus the cars now, but that's what created memories, was those old cars. And you had to have gas stations along the way, or filling stations, or service stations, or whatever you wanted to call it, because you never knew if that car was going to make it or not. And fast forward in a few years, we did several vacations, and some things that stick out in my mind as far as some vacations in the West. I remember holes in the ground, two in particular, and I later discovered that was the Meteor Crater and also the Grand Canyon. I remember cars being buried in the ground, passing by and seeing as a small boy. I later determined and figured out that was Cadillac Ranch. Trees that were supposed to be petrified, and I got out there and I said, Daddy, where are they? And he said, well, son, they're laying on the ground. And I picked up a rock and looked at it, and my dad said, well, that was a petrified tree at one time, and it used to be standing up before it became petrified. Well, what caused this big hole in the ground? And just all the many questions that you ask as a boy to your dad or your mom. And one thing that's popping into my head, and I'm doing this all impromptu, just from the heart, because I think that's oftentimes the best place to come from, is my mom would be sitting over in the passenger seat with a road atlas, and that was the only method of navigation you had back in those days, besides the signs on the roads, was a road atlas. And she wasn't the best at reading a road atlas, and that would cause some heat in the car from time to time between my dad and my mom. And he'd have to pull off and figure out where we needed to go next. But that was just all part of growing up back then. You didn't have an app for your phone, because you didn't even have a phone. It was back at the house on mounted on a wall with a 3-foot cord, and you had to squat in the floor to be able to talk on it, because it was mounted to a wall. And they came out with these portable phones with longer cords, and all the many changes. The first microwave my dad ever bought, paid like $400 for it from J.C. Penney. I remember that very well, because I blew an egg up in it trying to cook an egg. And that was another time that my dad applied some discipline to me, but I learned a lot of that. And the vibrating beds, which I later became known as the magic fingers, or the Ford Philco TVs in the hotel rooms or motel rooms back in the day, that actually had a radio built into them. And I thought that was really cool, because I was all about TVs and buttons and knobs and anything that I could do to turn a knob or push a button or see something move or come on or turn off, including sitting out in the driveway in Alabama with an old AM radio in the car, trying to tune it at night to listen to stations coming out of Chicago and New York on the old AM radio, to building a crystal radio and listening to stations there, draping an antenna clear across the yard. And those boyhood memories really begin to play key in something that happened to me roughly a year ago. I was hot. I got in really bad health shape and was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. At the time, I had less than 20% pumping capability, and I was in pretty crappy shape. So laid in that hospital bed, I made some decisions that I was going to see a few things and go out and travel a little bit and take in some of God's glory. And so I started researching and ran across some good YouTube videos on traveling. That happened to circle back around to Route 66. And I learned and started researching Route 66 and said, hey, I've got a boyhood connection to Route 66. Being those trips that I talked about with the cars in the ground being Cadillac Ranch, the Meteor Crater, the Grand Canyon, all those places out there that we went in the day and stayed in these mom and pop motels and ate at the mom and pop diners. One of my dad's big things that he used to love is staying at the Holiday Inn, and the one thing in the iconic days of Holiday Inn, it wasn't a Holiday Inn Express, it was a Holiday Inn hotel. They all had restaurants in them. They had those gleaming, most beautiful neon roadside signs that I used to absolutely love as a boy. I knew if my dad saw one of those, that's where we were going. And that all tied back into Route 66. And just to show you a couple of things here, just a second, that I got before I went on my journey on Route 66, and how I rounded up and figured out that I've been on Route 66 is like I was saying, YouTube. I ran across someone that to this day is a huge, he's probably 95% of the reason that I have fallen so madly in love with Route 66 and what it stands for, was Roman Rich. He's a guy from Missouri, 40-year-old guy. He's an old soul. He has a certain love for the road, a certain love for the people on the road, and a certain love of the stories and the real heartfelt meaning of the road. And I watched the majority of his videos, and the deeper I dived into watching his videos, the more I fell in love with it. To the point that I went out and bought books, and like this hat that I'm showing you right here, this was another hat. It was actually one I was involved in fitness for many years. And it's got a fitness logo underneath this ironed on Route 66 patch, because I didn't have a Route 66 hat, but I wanted to have one for my journey, so I made this one up before I left. Went out and got this beautiful book right here with all sorts of pictures and things within the other book that were just absolutely amazing. Also got the Route 66 encyclopedia. And if you see, I'm old school. I got little pieces of paper torn out here in the places I wanted to make sure I covered when I went on my trip. Later things like the Route magazine and the Show Me Route 66 Missouri publication here. So, you know, that research, I decided I was going to get out and do this traveling that I talked about, and decided I was going to do a western trip. So I left Louisville and headed toward Washington State. I ended up in Washington State, hit the national parks up there, came back down through Oregon and hit 101 there in California, drove it out for quite a ways, hit up the redwood and the sequoia forest and some of the quaint little shops on 101, and came over and hit Death Valley and some of those national parks there in California, and then jumped back over to the coast and went down to the pier at Santa Monica. And that's where life changed. Life will never be the same after traveling Route 66 the first time. I stayed the night in Santa Monica at the Viceroy Hotel, prepared for my journey that lasted, I think, roughly 4 weeks on Route 66. Combination of study, this particular adventure handbook that I dearly studied before I actually left for the trip. I pulled it out, and this is a book meant to go east to west instead of west to east like I did. So I was going through the book backwards, trying to read the book backwards, but it worked out. And So I proceeded on down Route 66, hit all those amazing spots, and the further I got into Route 66, the more I began to be connected with Route 66 and what I had heard and read and seen in Roman Rich's videos and some other YouTube video creators out there. To the point that every stop, it seemed like I was traveling with two small dogs, myself and my F-150. It's crew cab, but it only had one person in it at the beginning of the trip. But by the end of the trip, I felt like I had a whole room full, a whole truckload of friends with me that I had met and made along the way. My YouTube channel is full of interviews and stops that I made along the way, and I got raw video footage I haven't even put into videos yet. But the thing that I want you to understand about Route 66, at least from my standpoint, is it is not a road. A road, yes it is a road, but that's not what it's all about. It's about so much more. I've got this little display case right here that I bought whenever I got back. And along the way, I would go off the beaten path, not just on what was open and drivable, but places that were not per se drivable, but I took my truck anyway. Went around some places that were supposed to be closed to through traffic. I didn't consider that closed because I wasn't going through, because you couldn't get through. But I decided along the way in those closed areas where the road was majorly torn up, I wanted some souvenirs. So that's what you see right here. You see some souvenirs from different places that I stopped as far as the different constructions of the road. You got asphalt, you got concrete, you got mixtures, you got layers. You can look at some of these and there's several layers of either asphalt, concrete, or some deviation thereof. And I just pick up this piece, this is a piece of concrete, not sure, it's probably Portland. I've learned that from some videos that I've watched. Imagine if a piece of this road was actually a piece that was driven on by my dad on one of our vacations. And you think, well, there's no way, but yes, there is a way. It's very possible those tires that my dad had on his 73 Pontiac Granville very possibly touched a piece of this road. And that's where it really begins to hit hard. Motel key fobs from the Wigwam in Rialto, California, and the historic Route 66 motel in Tucumcari, New Mexico. I bought both of these from the owners of the motels because I wanted to have that remembrance or that history, because that's the way I remember it being in the old days of traveling on the roads and staying in the hotels where you got the key fobs. There weren't anything as far as electronic keys and all that like you have today. But connecting back to this road, I miss my parents very, very much. The loss of them radically changed the way I look at life. I've been on many, many trips to Disneyland, Six Flags. I could go on and on naming those, but those are vacations. Those are just quick getaways. You don't get connected to places like that that are out there with every place you turn in Pigeon Forge is something about a souvenir shop selling some kind of a same thing that they do 2 doors down. I love going there with my family, but that's the reason is because I go up there with family. But Route 66 is something you can connect with America. Old school America, new school America working together for one common goal. And that one common goal is keeping America's Mother Road, Route 66, alive for future generations. Because we can't let history die. If history dies, we forget. And then we get to a point where we can't create new history. I'll be driving along and a song will come on the radio. Or I'll have a flashback to something that happened on my Route 66 journey. And honestly, I tear up because it brings back such good memories. Glenn Campbell, Count Basie, Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. My dad had a portable 8-track player that either you could use in the house with an adapter or you could set it on a hump in a special holder in the your car. The hump, most cars don't have those now, but it was a little round thing that covered the drive shaft and the transmission, and you could plug it up to your cigarette lighter, and he would play those 8-track tapes over and over and over again on the trip. But that was fine. That's what he wanted to do. He had a whole 8-track cassette or case that he had full of different ones. But connecting with that has caused me to connect with parts of my inner being I never thought I'd be able to reconnect with in the depths that I have been able to. To a point I'm going to bring up and show you a picture I'm going to talk to you about a few weekends ago that just meant the world to me. This is my favorite spot. For some reason, I feel the most connected to this place, almost in a spiritual angle or spiritual way on Route 66. I fell in love with it the first time I came through in October and November of last year, and then also in this past late January when I went up to Missouri to help get a friend of mine elected to the presidentship of the Missouri Route 66 Commission. And it's this bridge right here. It's the Gasconade River Bridge. Old bridge, I'm not 100% sure, but it's probably a 1920s, 30s design that is in dire need. It's either going to be disassembled or it's going to be imploded or maybe a combination thereof. It's near Lebanon, Missouri, and it is not capable of carrying semi-trucks across it in the event they have to divert the interstate, which I don't know if you know it or not. You do have to have escape routes or redirection routes on interstates in case of a disaster or major pileups and stuff like this, and this is having to be replaced. So they're looking at tearing it down. It's almost a surreal feeling to go down to it and look at it and think about it. But hey, I traveled across that bridge not knowing it as a boy. And many other people have traveled across this bridge, and we're going to destroy that bridge just cause, in my opinion, probably not a good reason. There's a river bridge, Gasconade River Bridge Society out on Facebook and social media that's trying to preserve it, and there's a lot of people out there fighting for it. I even did a fundraiser for my birthday to go towards the salvation of this bridge. And there's multiple places up and down Route 66 that are like this, that are either gone or partially gone, or in some transitional standpoint, that there's many people out there trying to save these locations. If all goes well, and we'll be heading out with a crew to the Painted Desert Trading Post. It's an old Indian trading post that's in very bad disrepair that a group of friends of mine that I've recently met are involved in rebuilding or rehabbing and trying to continue it for the people that are on Route 66 doing their journeys today. But I've become a part of a crew, and I didn't know that a crew even existed, but I'm a crew of roadies, is what we call ourselves. And I went up late January, as I was mentioning, to the Missouri Route 66 Commission board meeting, and also the general meeting to elect Roman Riches, the new president, to go forward with new ideas and new ways of saving Route 66 and preserving Route 66. Before, on my first trip, you couldn't see this bridge from the interstate, but as I was driving on the interstate, because I'd driven it up until the point that it was getting dark and I wanted to jump on the interstate off of Route 66, just a little easier driving at night for me. I passed this bridge on the interstate not knowing I'd be able to see it. I drove by it and I actually had some tears that began to stream down my face. And that's the connection that we all have in some fashion. There are diehard Route 66 fans, roadies, lovers, whatever terminology you want to use. And so we've got to do everything we can possibly do to carry this on. Fight for it. Because I bet you the young people that may end up watching this video, even though that's not per se the intended audience, go ask your parents, go ask your grandparents about Route 66, and they'll say, man, I didn't realize you knew anything about Route 66. Well, I don't. And that's why I'm asking you, tell me about it. That's what will keep this alive. That's what will keep this route running and going and being improved and going through gyrations of changes, is people that are devoted and people that care about the history. Take a little bit of time. I'm going to put some links in the description box below. And check out the Roman Ridge. Check out hookedonroute66.com. Check out some of Picks by Jacks, the Drew Knowles book. There's a easy guide to 66. I'll put a link in for. There's a lot of good resources out there. But remember this, it's not a road, it's the journey. And my journey has just begun on this road. I'll be darned if I'm going to let health get in the way of me enjoying some things like this. Because honestly, discovering this has taken my psyche and my heart and my soul to unbelievable levels that I think honestly have helped my healing process. I'm up to 35+% now. So ask yourself, what are you doing with your 35%, 70%, 80%, or the ones that are lucky enough to have 90 or 100% capability? What are you doing toward this Route 66 cause? I'd appreciate any comments, concerns, likes, subscriptions, whatever, but it's not about that. It's about the route, the journey, and the people. And I'm going to give an honorable mention to somebody here that I don't have a picture to show you, but I may put one in the actual video. There's Ramona at the Munger Moss Motel. I'll never forget meeting her. She reminds me so much of my own grandmother that I miss so much. The love that I felt from her, the love that she has given to so many other people, the hug that I got from her in the 35 to 40 minutes that she spent talking with me and amongst her guests coming in, made that trip where we got Roman Rich elected, and I met all my new roadie friends, and have connected with those people in ways that I could have only have ever imagined. But I love the fact I've got a grandmother on Route 66. Till the next turn of the wheel, this is Mark out. Have a good day.